yeah, after that thing I said earlier about like knowing how to use mixed media, I've got this and this. So might do some interpretive dance, but other than that, let's just go, I guess. So Jake asked me to talk about Dota, and first of all, how many of you guys actually know what Dota is? Okay, cool. In that case, I'll do like a super brief sort of explanation. Essentially, it's a multiplayer game where you have a map with 3 lanes on it, arranged, one moment, like that. There you go. Oh yeah. Excellent. And each team has their base at one end of the map, and what they're trying to do is force momentum up into the other team's base and destroy a building. There's monsters, there's heroes, there's all kinds of gods, wizards, whatever. And essentially, it's a game which is constantly being updated, and when Jake told me that the sort of focus of this evening was old and new and kind of then and now, it's kind of a complicated game in that respect. So essentially what I've been doing is trying to come up with a different way to think about it, a more useful way to think about it, because what tends to happen is people talk about games that are finished, that are sort of like discrete objects in time. So for example, Ocarina of Time is one of those. You'll sort of see it redone or gussied up every now and again, but essentially it's mechanically and narratively the same each time you go back. With Dota, you have things like patches that rebalance the game, that bring you new heroes, that update how items work, the sort of the different mechanics that carry you through the game will change, and so the experience will change. And what that means is when you go back, you're not going back to the same thing, you're going back to a different version of a game, you're going back to a new thing. And so, a couple of years ago, I wasn't a games journalist, I was a fashion writer. And about this time, I would have been having a very different kind of meltdown because it's Fashion Week. And so I started thinking more and more about how high fashion and how the fashion industry actually relates to how Dota works. It's not a perfect comparison, but essentially what you have in the world of fashion, you have a set of fashion weeks. You have periods throughout the year where a designer will set out their ideas, they'll set out their thesis, they'll send 40 looks down the runway, and then they'll sort of sit back and you'll see what all the other designers in that city have done. And then after that, you start getting hobbyists and you start getting industry experts and analysts all having a little look through what those designers have set out, and they'll pick out the ideas, they'll pick out themes, they'll pick up recurring influences, and those will become the trends. That's what people have decided on as the looks for that season, the sort of guiding principles. And so what I found is when a patch hits in Dota, when all those updates come out and you've got a whole set of notes that actually explain what's been tweaked, what's been changed, what's been updated, what's been added, you'll find Reddit explodes, Twitter explodes, everything goes nuts looking through those notes, trying to pick out the trends, the things that are useful, and the threads that run through this entire game now. Because it's crucial to knowing how best to exploit the mechanics at your disposal. If you can actually be the one that figures it out, the one that perfects the system. And so what you do is you look at what IceRock, the current developer that Valve now hires and pays to tweak about and do things with, what he has had a look at and what he thought was overpowered and what has been nerfed, things that have been buffed because they weren't prevalent enough, different things that will perhaps alter the game in subtle ways and bring it more to what he thinks it should be, more what, how it should play as. You start to see his intention for that sort of patch, that season's trend. And so it's at that point that I think it becomes a lot like fashion. Obviously, as time goes by, that comparison gets less and less accurate, I guess, because there's a lot of mechanics and a lot of, you know, sort of, you do find the way to exploit it. It becomes a lot less personal. But in that period of adjustment, people are sort of trying things on and trying to sort of, I guess, reorient their wizard wardrobe is possibly the best way, or the worst way, that I've come up with to sort of explain it. And so, but you will still see, even if pros, even if the super high level players manage to sort of figure it out, you will still see these weird echoes of fashion, because you'll see people sort of more on, I guess, my level, or perhaps if you guys play and are pro or semi-pro at your level, they'll sort of see what someone on Navi was doing. They'll see a strat that was implemented, and they'll kind of do the equivalent of looking at a red carpet outfit and going, do you think that would work on me? And what they'll do is they'll strut their stuff down those 3 lanes, and they will perhaps not really do it so well. It might work kind of accidentally, it might do some kind of an approximation of the job, but it's a similar kind of an aspiration, a kind of learning, a kind of echoing down through different strata, and you'll see that as it happens, I guess. There's another patch that's kind of imminent at the moment, so I'm kind of eager to see whether this kind of idea that I cobbled together while desperately trying to think of something to say will actually sort of bear out in those same ways again. But so you'll also sort of have weird experiences. I know I did this morning on the train when I was coming back up to London. I booted up my laptop just to sort of do a bit of offline practice with a particular hero, and found that I hadn't actually updated Dota since Christmas. And so that particular sort of echo of the game was still there, but I'd reoriented how I'd play and how I'd sort of integrated with all the rest of the heroes, and I guess that sort of that wizard wardrobe had realigned, and so to go back felt very odd. It felt very retro and not real almost. It was sort of, it didn't apply anymore, and what I wanted to do was take those old heroes and sort of reorient them to what I actually do now, and sort of I was playing with, there's an item called a blink dagger, and now it doesn't cost any mana to use it, but then it costs 75. I was like, how do we live like this? It's kind of the same way that I feel about, you know, those sort of cycle shorts that were attached to skirts at the end of the 80s. So no one is going to go with me on that one, but rest assured it's a very good comparison, and you should all be sort of on your feet applauding. And so I guess I don't exactly have a conclusion to this, but in the same way Dota doesn't have a conclusion. It's that sort of the same drive to keep things vibrant and viable and fresh and interesting. It's not about perfecting, it's about finding new ways to express things and to keep the whole thing just alive and ticking and interesting. So I guess that's it for that thought. Does anyone have any questions?
Actually, I already know the answer to this. I just want you to tell the room how much you've spent on Dota. I answered the question you have to answer.
I think it's gone up since then. So, how much was it? I can't remember. It's at like I think it's kind of over $200, and yeah, okay, fine. So anyway, that's a thing that happened, and it was, yeah, it's on Dota hats and things. So there was a kind of another consumerist fashion element at play here, but I was definitely not talking about that one. I was very definitely talking about the patches.
Kind of going back to your comparison there to the fashion industry, where at least like with the fashion industry you get like resurgences in themes that have already come past, and there's good records of what the themes were as time goes on. Do Do you feel that that's something that video games could benefit from, of having a sense of themes that have been prevalent returning in patches, and sort of an awareness of the themes that have run through patches, even if we don't return to them, I guess?
I think with Dota, that's one of the points where this doesn't necessarily hold up, because even though certain things might reappear, certain heroes might come back into vogue, it's usually for different reasons. It's not deliberately referencing or calling back the past, it's because some confluence of other factors has changed in that it allows that other thing to be viable or relevant again. And so you do sort of have odd moments where you do sort of go, well, this feels a bit retro, Naga Sirens kind of, you know, cropping up a little bit more, or, you know, something like that, but it doesn't have the same underlying root cause. That said, there are sort of obviously, when you're working with anything that has aesthetics and that has creative influences, you do sort of find people, you know, picking and choosing from their own influences. That's kind of like a mental toolbox that you will just always have, and so that's why you do sort of have people going, oh, that reminds me of that bit in that game. You know, it's a similar kind of ethos, and that's just because, you know, by virtue of being creative and inspired by other bits and pieces. So, is there time for one more?
Alright, I'll make this quick. I kind of want to just kind of piggyback a little bit on Nora's question, because I kind of have an answer, which is that I was a big StarCraft 1 player, and that also has a lot of what you kind of identify, but rather than being dictated by essentially a developer putting out patches which change the kind of mechanics of the game to such a kind of a more severe level. StarCraft 1 for a long time was balanced around patches which will have a very similar theme, but they change kind of small variables. So there was that aspect that Laura kind of hinted at, that certain players, they revived trends because they were more comfortable, in particular because they were older, so they were kind of more well versed in a particular style of playing, and it was kind of interesting because it brought back, you know, retro decisions, and there's a real element of a player putting their mark on the game and saying, this is the way I play. It may be a little bit substandard now, but, you know, an SCV still costs 50 minerals as it did in 1998, so it's not that dramatically different. Anyways, that's my question.
I think that with some games, essentially, if a patch comes close to providing an ideal answer or an ideal style of play, certainly at the higher levels, you'll see people sort of gravitate towards that, because obviously the objective is winning. But when there are sort of multiple right answers, or even sort of more at, I guess, my level, you'll find people who are far more comfortable looking at sort of the different strategies that are, you know, potentially viable, and just going, okay, well, I'm more of a sort of split push kind of player, so I kind of like to just do this, even though it's maybe not optimal, but it's still, I can sort of fudge it so that it works, and that is more me. And I guess that's, you know, the sort of I guess, to try and bring it back to the fashion analogy, there will always be things that you know suit you better, that are, you know, that just work for you and that you feel more comfortable in. And so you will sort of try and bring a little bit of that to the table when you play a game. It's that same sort of sense of, well, this is me, this is what I'm most comfortable in, this is what I'm familiar with, and that's where I feel I shine. And so rather than sort of trying to do something completely, you know, off the wall, I guess, even though that might be the thing that absolutely definitely works if you get it right, then you will still bring a lot of yourself to the game. I think that might be it.